everyone, I'm Jessica Stutzman and welcome back to the Millcreek Government Channel. Recycling, one of my favorite topics, has so many environmental benefits. It saves water and energy, lowers pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, improves air and water quality, preserves landfill space, and conserves natural resources. From experience, I have learned that while it is important to recycle, it is even more imperative that we recycle the right items. Today, we will touch on what those acceptable materials are, along with some common recycling mistakes. To take us back to the basics is the Erie County Sustainability Coordinator, Brittany Preshak. Brittany, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Absolutely.
We get to talk, you and I, all the time on the telephone about what we are not recycling or we're not supposed to recycle that week, or maybe something new that got added and we are supposed to recycle. So what I want to do is bring our viewers and residents back up to speed on the basics of recycling.
Sure.
So just really down to the core, what is acceptable recycling at the curbside in the blue bin or in the blue toter, or if your municipality directs you to a plastic bag, what's acceptable in that bag?
Sure. So actually, we kind of call it our top 10 list. And so we've got kind of our cardboard, paperboard. Those are your basics. Folded down, of course. We want those broken down and flat. Then you've got your junk mail, office paper stuff. Newspaper is still always accepted. As we move into, we've got aluminum cans, steel and tin cans, and then glass is still accepted, any color, bottle glass only though. We don't want the other types of glass. And then as we get into the plastics, we're kind of looking at 3 types of plastics, and that's based on the container. So plastic bottles, plastic tubs, and plastic jugs.
Okay.
Other than that, we really don't want anything else in those curbside bins.
Okay, great. And so the cardboard and food boxes I want to touch on. I always tell when I do my student lectures or my student classes on recycling that the paperboard boxes are like your cereal boxes, your maybe spaghetti boxes. We know again what magazines and paper, mail, and I always tell residents that junk mail is fine, but if there's any sort of credit card offer or your sensitive information is printed on these materials, that should be shredded. Beverage cans, again, aluminum cans like your pop cans, and then food cans like the tin and steel cans you mentioned, that would be like your tuna cans and
Soup cans.
Soup cans, good, thank you. And then glass bottles and jars you mentioned, and then the plastic jugs, jars, bottles, tubs, and lids, all the caps are on.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and go ahead and tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So the best way to make sure that it gets recycled is if we can push a little bit of that air out of your bottle, put the cap right back on, it all stays contained. It also helps that if there's a little bit of liquid left in it, it doesn't actually come out and contaminate the paper, since we're a single stream process. So we do like the lids to go back on. One of the things in the sorting process, and we'll probably talk about it a little bit more in detail, is that glass gets broken, and so it has to fall through these 2-inch by 2-inch holes during the sorting process, and anything that's that same size will also fall through and contaminate the glass. And so unfortunately, if you were to put the cap by itself into your recycling bin, it ends up contaminating our glass stream. It's also the reason we don't take things like plastic forks and silverware, any straws, anything that's about that size, that 2-inch by 2-inch size.
The other thing I want to mention, because I thought at one time I was being a wonderful recycler, I was doing my part. I have daily disposable contacts, and of course they have the recycle symbol on the bottom. They are very small because they're holding my contacts, and I would try to recycle those. And during one of our many tours to the recycling facility, we learned, again, nothing that small can be recycled. And I like that you mentioned the plastic jugs, jars, bottles, and tubs. Those are more categories now rather than the specific recycling symbol with the number.
Right.
We're getting away from that type of messaging, right?
Yes, that's very true, yes. So instead of talking about the plastic numbers, one of the things that we found is it's very confusing to residents. And as the plastic industry changes, although those numbers are on there, the quality has changed on some of them, or the durability, and so they're not as easily recyclable. So instead of talking about plastic numbers, one of the things that we'd rather talk about is the container type. So that's why we talk about bottles, jugs, tubs. Those I think are a little bit easier to distinguish for residents. Originally the numbers on the plastics with the little triangle symbol was only meant to identify the resin type. There are 7 different resin types of plastic, and they basically vary on durability, thickness, maybe color a little bit, and purpose really. And so that was to help the plastic industry. It really wasn't supposed to be a message about recycling, and it became a message about recycling, and so now we're sort of re-educating folks. Cutting back on those number systems, we'd rather talk about the specific container types.
Wonderful. And where does all of the recycling go in Erie County?
Yeah, so there's actually 2 main places that'll end up. So either Waste Management, they have a recycling facility. It's called a Material Recovery Facility, or a MRF. It's in Neville Island down near Pittsburgh, and so it either goes there, or if it's collected by Advanced Disposal, it usually goes to the Buffalo facility. So that's kind of where our stuff goes. There really isn't a recycling sorting facility in Erie County. We do have a little bit of manual sort from some of our local haulers, but a lot of times most of our stuff gets collected together and either goes to Pittsburgh or Buffalo.
So the materials that arrive at this facility, at the MRF, either in Buffalo or in Pittsburgh, they are all coming in via the single stream method. Explain to our residents, I still get this question, residents call me all the time, what is single stream? They don't understand it. And then from single stream, how does everything get sorted and separated? So what is single stream?
So single stream just means that all of those materials that we've decided are acceptable in our area, they can go in the same container. So instead of having to have a separate bin for aluminum, for glass, for plastic, now everything goes in one bin. So that's what single stream means. It does not mean that your trash can go in with the recycling. We still want to keep the trash separate, but our recyclables can all get mixed together. And the reason we did that is in the industry, they found that consumers found it more convenient, and so volume increased in the amount of recyclables we collected, whereas before they were having trouble getting that volume. So now it's a little more convenient, but it does have a little bit more labor on the back end for the haulers, which is why we have the sorting facilities we do.
Right.
And so those sorting facilities, essentially everything comes in and it goes onto what's called a tipping floor. It's basically a concrete pad, everything gets dumped out, all mixed together, and it goes onto a conveyor belt. Usually the first step is a manual sort. They're going to pull out things that they know are easily recyclable or trash. They want to remove that trash right from the get-go before it even goes into the system. And then a lot of it is mechanical, so a lot of different automated machines that'll pull out different types of materials. Usually the first things that come out is your cardboard and your paper. So there's a system of drums that kicks up these flat objects, these 2D objects, which should be your cardboard and your paperboard and other types of paper. Those go up the line, and falling between it goes your bottles, your cans, your glass, and those types of items. So those are the first things that come off, and they get baled out separately. In the plastics, they use an optic scanner. What that is essentially it's a laser that's going to look as a bottle comes past or a piece of plastic comes past. This laser can help identify the type of plastic it is, so it actually gets separated correctly. They use a puff of air then for the next system that pulls that right off of the conveyor belt, so it goes into the right container size and is baled together. Aluminum is not so there's aluminum and then there's steel metal containers. Aluminum is not magnetic, so they use an eddy current, which is like a little jolt of electricity. It pops those bottles right off. And then on the steel ones, they are magnetic, so they can use a giant magnet that actually picks those up as they come across the conveyor belt, and those get sorted separately. The hardest one, and it can be separated at any point within the stream, is glass. Glass is broken, essentially. It gets broken anytime from when it hits your curbside recycling container, to the truck that it gets collected in, to the semi-truck that everything gets mixed in before it goes to the sorting facility. It gets broken all the way along the stream, and so they sort of use that as part of the separation process. Glass breaker breaks everything down, and like we mentioned before, it goes through those 2-inch by 2-inch holes. So if you think about that as it comes along the stream, all those little pieces falling through, that's why we want to make sure we keep anything smaller than 2 by 2 out of the stream unless it's glass.
Right, and so tell me about the caps going on glass bottles. What do we do with those?
So metal caps on glass bottles, if it's smaller than 2 inches by 2 inches, my recommendation is to throw it in the trash. Larger glass bottles that have like your spaghetti sauce bottles, those types of ones, those caps are actually big enough, and so they'll be pulled off by the magnet more likely than not.
Okay. And recycling is a practice or a behavior, again, that we have worked really hard to make sure, that our residents participate in. And it really does. I know it makes me feel good. It makes our residents feel good about doing something to, help save the environment or do their part to be eco-friendly. So, but the recycling end of this, we need to look at this as an industry. And so there are some mechanics to the recycling process maybe that our residents don't think about. Do you want to touch on, maybe the recycling business end of things?
Sure. So a lot of folks actually assume that recycling is still a for-profit business. Recycling and waste is a business in and of itself. It's not a nonprofit. It's not a government service. It's a business. And so the point of it is to make money. Also cover all of those expenses that go into actual operations. So when we talk about recycling, it's not meant to be a for-profit mechanism. It's a cost avoidance, which basically means it costs less to recycle than it does for trash. So if you've got this much cost to actually send your material to the landfill, and you've got this much cost if you recycle it, then that middle ground is your savings. And so from a business perspective, for many of our commercial businesses out there that want to recycle, to start recycling, they'll actually start to see a cost savings, but they're still going to spend money on removal of their waste.
Right. And so that's why when you add, you've got, you're a business, you've got your trash dumpster, but that's why it also costs money to have your recycling dumpster put in place, because it's not a free service. You do have the labor for, everything that goes into it. So the driver that needs to haul the material, the fuel, the material, what it costs to actually make the dumpster itself, or, so there's different components into, when you sign up for recycling, you're not going to get dropped off a free bin, or again, if you're a business, or it's not going to be a free service provided.
Right. And it also starts to vary to the cost of recycling, what that piece is based on the markets. I mean, recycling, in order to recycle something, there has to be a market out there for that material. And so as the cost goes up and down on what someone's willing to pay for that recyclable material, that also will impact the bottom line for our waste and recycling haulers too.
And so that's why I do try to educate our residents that it is so important to recycle the right way, because this is a business, and if you recycle the wrong thing, then it does end up costing more energy, time, resources into fixing the problem that was thrown into the recycling, rather than just taking what was actually accepted in the first place. So with that being said, once everything is sorted, separated, and baled at the material recovery facility, where does it go next? Because I know we always talk about a can be used, recycled, and back on the shelf in 60 days. So where does recycling go after it leaves the MRF?
So it'll depend on who's actually going to take on that material. So some of it might stay within the state. It depends on where those markets are. Some of it might go on a shipping container and set overseas. A lot of our recycling markets these days are in China and India, Indonesia, in those areas. So they're actually purchasing a lot of our recyclable materials. Some of it might stay local. We do have a couple of local companies that use recyclable materials. Foam Fabricators likes to take on the formed styrofoam or polystyrene, and then engineered plastics likes to take on different types of plastic materials, but a lot of times it'll end up getting sent at different parts of the state.
And I've heard you, my next question is, and I've heard you give the answer, so I think it's a great one I want our residents to hear. Why are some items not recyclable in Erie County, but they maybe are across the U.S., somewhere maybe in California? So why can some things be recycled here and not in other places, or vice versa?
Sure. So recyclable is a general term. All it means is that something can be turned into something new. It has a second life to it, essentially. But what impacts what can be accepted in a certain area for recycling is kind of three factors. I need enough volume of the material generated in that area to make it worth even collecting. I also need someone who wants to collect that material from me, and then if it's part of the single stream process, they also need to be able to separate it out from the rest of the system too. And so those are two big components. The last one is someone needs to want to use it, right? So if there's no one out there, no market for that material, there's no purpose in collecting it. So if those three factors, if any piece of those is not in line, then that item's not going to be accepted in an area.
Okay, and so speaking of unacceptable items, I do see some acceptable items on our table and some unacceptable items on our table. So I do want to go through each of these, and I thought this would be really beneficial to touch on, again, the items that are acceptable, the items that are not acceptable, but I like to explain why, because as a parent now, and granted she's only 5 months, you know, I said just because I said so, answer doesn't usually fly. So let's kind of go over some of these things on the table that you brought with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think it's really helpful for folks to know why, because then it actually makes it easier for them to understand and remember. So a couple items, so for example, so these are your plastic silverware. I'm sure we get lots and lots of these in to-go meals, everywhere you go. Unfortunately, these are a harder plastic, so there's two impacts that these have to the stream if they get put into your recycling container. They will either fracture during the crush or during the compacting process, which means now you've got little shards, or they'll just actually, as whole pieces, they'll end up flipping over and end up in those 2-inch by 2-inch holes that are meant to collect our glass. So a lot of times those types of things will contaminate the glass stream. So we don't want any plastic silverware, no plastic straws either.
Okay, perfect. Moving on to the plastic bags. These are the plastic grocery bags. Why are these not accepted? And there is usually a large recycle symbol on them.
Yes.
Why are these not accepted? There it is. And it's listed, let's see the symbol. It's listed
Rather
as,
small.
Yes, as a number 2 HDPE. Why are these not accepted in the blue curbside bins and toters?
Yep, so when we look at those three things that I mentioned, the volume, the collection and separation piece, and then someone needs to use it, these impact the separation process. What happens with these bags is they'll actually get stuck in the gears that separate out cardboard and paper products. They're a set of drums, essentially. When they get wrapped all in there, they can impact the process in two different ways. For one thing, they'll actually stop any material that was meant to fall through, like your bottles and your cans, so now we're not getting any separation. Also, they have to shut down the entire facility for a certain amount of time to cut off all of these little plastic bags. So now it increases the labor cost to actually as part of the sorting system. So instead of putting these in your curbside bin, our recommendation is to bundle them all up and take them back to your grocery store. That is the best place to make sure that they actually get recycled.
And I know so many places, I give them out all the time at expos. You know, bring the fabric totes with you, and then you won't need to, you know, collect these and recycle them back at the grocery store. But I don't know of any grocery store or big box store that doesn't accept these back for recycling. So you have a lot of avenues around town for recycling them. And then the other thing we don't want to do, and I will say, is put our recycling to be collected inside this plastic bag.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes, that's absolutely right.
Okay, what's the next thing? We have a white foam to-go container.
So polystyrene is one of the items that is never accepted in our curbside recycling bins. Unfortunately, there really aren't a lot of alternative outlets for polystyrene like this. So to-go containers, plastic cups, all of those types of things. Unfortunately, they're trash. More likely than not, they're contaminated with food, and that's one of the most important reasons we want to keep them out of our recycling stream.
Right. But even if they're not contaminated with food, we still don't recycle them.
Correct. There really isn't an outlet for them at this time.
And then there's a napkin inside, because that usually goes with your food container.
Yep, so no napkins. Napkins are usually the last line of being recycled from cardboard or paper products and all the way down the line. And so they are not going to have a second life after that. They've already had their second life.
Right. And you've got a little medicine bottle.
That's right. So a lot of folks like to try and recycle these. Unfortunately, these are usually too small. Also, harder plastic, these are going to fracture. And so what happens is when this gets crushed, contaminates our glass stream again.
Right. And if you do have medication, of course, you know, either take off the label or black your name out, and then there are multiple collections, one-day collections that either happen throughout the county, or we have several medication return bins where medication, you know, can be accepted and properly disposed of.
Yep.
How about the 2 plastic cups next to you?
Yep. So a lot of times folks like to recycle these. Again, you can see that they have recycling symbols on the bottom of them. They are 1 in 6, so 2 different types of plastics. However, these materials are very difficult to pull out of the recycling stream, and so we do not want these in our sorting system.
Right. And on the same topic of cups, we have a coffee cup here.
That's right.
And to me, this would look to the to the regular consumer. This would look recyclable. You've got a paper cup, and I've got a plastic lid, which does have a recycling symbol on it, very small, and a number inside. So is this recyclable?
So on the paper cup, no. Inside of it is usually a wax coating because it's meant to hold a beverage, and so we don't want this in our recycling stream. On this lid piece here, this usually has a heat-resistant coating on it, and so again, it's not going to be, unfortunately, recyclable, and so neither of these items should ever go into a recycling bin.
Okay, great. And then let's go to whichever one you want to hit next.
So if we keep on the line of non-recyclables, this is the last example I have of a non-recyclable. This is a little paper container that you might have gotten straw or fries in or anything like that. And again, this is not going to be recyclable. More than likely it has some kind of coating to the outside of it, but also it's contaminated with food.
Okay.
And so unfortunately, we don't want something like this into our recycling stream.
Okay, so even though it looks like paper, not recyclable.
Correct.
And on the topic of paper, tell me about paper shredding.
So right now, unfortunately, we are not able to use plastic bags to collect our recyclables anymore.
Again, and that's a new change.
It is a new change as of the beginning of 2018. It's a new change that'll be basically across commercial collection as well as residential collection. And so when we talked about the plastic grocery bag, this is the same reason. Plastic bags of any size and shape and color, even though some of them might be able to be opened, they've added extra labor to the sorting process. And so we would actually rather not use any plastic bags at all. And shredded paper had always been accepted in plastic bags, but because we've removed the plastic bags from the stream, or we're working on removing them from the stream, there really isn't a way to collect paper shredding and keep it contained. And so at this point, unfortunately, paper shredding will have to go into the trash, or you can compost it.
And what I understood about paper shredding too is once it's on the conveyor belt, it almost acts as a cloud and hides other recycling inside of it.
Correct. So it could do that, or it can get caught the same way that the plastic bags are caught in those drums that separate out that cardboard and the paper.
Right. The one I get all the time, pizza boxes.
So pizza boxes, here's the trick with pizza boxes. When you open it up, if that top has no oil residue, no cheese, anything left on it, take that, tear it off. That can go in your recycling bin. The bottom part most likely has a lot of grease and oil left to it. You can actually fold that and put that right in your trash. We do not want the food contaminated materials in our recycling bin.
And, with that, I want to also cover, and because we're not the material recovery facility, but we have heard from our friends there, say, oh, we get these really, really strange items coming across. I have heard things like bowling balls, diapers, plastic lawn chairs, plastic toys, plastic garden hoses, any of that recyclable?
Not at all. Unfortunately, not in the system how we collect it. It might have been recycled or recyclable depending on the types of material, but at this time, we really need to clean up our stream. Unfortunately, there's too much contamination and it's increasing labor costs, separation process, and all of those pieces that there's actually a losing cost as far as recycling is concerned. And so the cleaner we make our stream with just the items that we want recyclable, the better it is.
Okay, and then that goes, again, we just want glass from maybe the drinking type glasses, so whether that contains pop or beer or wine, those glasses can be recycled, not window glass, mirror glass, or candle glass.
Right, or cup glass. We don't want drinking cup glass either.
Okay, and what happens if somebody accidentally puts something that is not recyclable into our recycle bin? What happens next?
Sure. There's a couple different things that can happen to it. More than likely, it'll get pulled out as a residue material. And so at the end of the stream, after all the sorting has been done, there's usually some stuff left. About 20% of what we send to be recycled isn't actually recyclable. So it's about 20% residue rate. That ends up going to a landfill near one of those recycling facilities. So now we've paid to ship trash essentially from Erie County down to Pittsburgh or up to Buffalo for someone else to throw away for us.
Okay.
That's the more common end of that.
Okay.
And
so, and just to add to that, of course, we, don't want to we're trying to do the right thing. We don't want to spend more resources sending these wrong items to the recycling facility to spend more time on them.
Absolutely.
So we did talk about, again, all these plastics with the plastic resin codes. Again, that really doesn't mean a lot to us right now. Unfortunately, our show is ending. I think it's so informational. I really wanted to get this messaging out to our residents. Before we wrap up the show, I want to touch on the top 3 practices practices that our residents can do to make themselves better recyclers?
Yep. So the top things I would recommend, so the first one is when you're collecting your recycling, we want it loose. So if you've got a container, a toter, a bucket, a bin, whatever you've got, we want that recycling in there loose. So try and remove all plastic bags from your recycling stream, unless your municipality requires it. We do have a couple municipalities that still require bagged recycling, but they're larger bags and they're still part of a different system. But if you have a toter, that's how we want it. We don't want those bags. So that's step one. The second is if you can try and rinse out all of the liquid out of your different recycling containers as best you can, put the lids back on them. That's the third thing. So lids back on those containers, push out some of that air if you can, but that's kind of our recommendation.
Okay, and then the last thing, to leave the bottle caps on or off, which we touched on. You know, again, if it's plastic, go ahead and crush the plastic, put the cap back on. If it's glass, go ahead and leave it off. So Brittany, what's the major takeaway message with recycling right now? Again, it is ever changing, it's ever evolving. I want our residents to, you know, understand that maybe if something was accepted one year, it may not be accepted the next year, or they may have retrofitted the equipment and something that wasn't able to be recycled in 2017 can be recycled in 2018. So you have to just keep up with our department, and we're always changing. What's the big takeaway message?
Right, so right now the big takeaway is when in doubt, throw it out. We want that stream as clean as possible with just those top 10 items that we recommended. We don't want you to have to try and guess whether or not something is recyclable. If you're not sure, please place it in your trash. That way we keep that clean recycling stream.
Brittany, you have so much information on your website. How can you give your website? How can people get a hold of you and find out all of this information?
Absolutely. So the easiest way for our website is it's eriecountyrecycling.com. So pretty simple, and you'll find all the information about hazardous waste, electronics events, and then what is and isn't acceptable. Or you can give me a call at 451-7326.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Always
really,
happy.
Thank you. And going in depth, you know, now our viewers, I think, have a really good understanding of why things, again, not the because mommy said so. You know, people have a really good understanding of, you know, why things can and can't be recycled. So thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, absolutely.
Viewers, again, we want our recycling stream to be very, very clean. You know, there are things that are always changing. So if you want to stay up to date and current, you can go to Brittany's website. You can go to the Millcreek Township website. Our calendar, our magazine, all has the brand new up-to-date information always. And again, the takeaway message is when in doubt, throw it out. So thank you so much for tuning into today's show. And until next time, have a wonderful day.
You're watching the Millcreek Government Channel, powered by WQLN Public Media.